stirring up a storm in New York City. My name is Emily Carter, and at 34, I thought I had it all figured out. Living just outside New York City felt like being perched on the edge of possibility. Close enough to feel the pulse, far enough to breathe. I'd grown up believing in the American dream. Work hard, love deeply, and build a life you can call your own. For the past 8 years, I dedicated myself to my family, my career as a marketing analyst, and the small, meaningful rituals that made our suburban life feel magical. Morning jogs in Central Park, Friday night pizza with my husband David, spontaneous laughter echoing through our cozy apartment in Westchester. But behind those picture-perfect weekends and social media posts was a storm quietly brewing. David, my partner since college, 2 years older than me, with his crooked smile and unshakable calm, had grown distant. At first, I chalked it up to work stress or the fatigue of adulthood. But those little cracks quickly spread. It started with late nights at the office, a new passcode on his phone, whispers in the bathroom, and the unmistakable feeling of being shut out. Then I noticed something gut-wrenchingly familiar in his world. Stephanie. She was 33, effervescent, always quick with a joke, and, unfortunately, my best friend since grad school. We'd spent countless afternoons planning double dates, supporting each other's careers, and exchanging secrets over iced coffees. To realize that she, of all people, might be at the heart of this fracture sent a chill through my bones. I remember the night it all became real. A stray text on David's phone. "Miss you already." My gut twisted, my breath caught. The world narrowed to just that glowing blue screen. The next days crawled by in a blur, watching David and Stephanie exchange glances, piecing together their overlapping stories, and feeling the foundation of my life crumble. I was more than betrayed. I was unmoored. My in-laws, always quick with advice, began treating me with frosty civility, as if somehow I was responsible for David's behavior. Their voices echoed with judgment. "Maybe you're not trying hard enough, Emily. Maybe you should focus on being a better wife." The injustice stung, fueling a quiet storm inside me. I wasn't ready to fall apart, not in front of them, not before my daughter Lily, nor before the city that had shaped me. Instead, I chose resolve. Beneath the surface of polite smiles and casual greetings, I began gathering shards of truth, email receipts, screenshots, snippets of overheard conversation. It was painful, but it gave me power, a sense of control when everything else had slipped through my fingers. Looking back, the true storm wasn't just the affair. It was the realization that everyone around me believed I just let it blow over. They didn't know me at all. I wasn't the type to close my eyes and move on. In the heart of America's greatest city, I decided I would show them who I truly was. Not a victim, but a woman standing in the eye of the storm, ready to change the weather herself. The cracks ran deeper than David. As my world crumbled around me, I began to realize that the pain I felt wasn't just the direct result of David's betrayal. It was deeper, woven into their every sideways glance, their subtle whispers, and the cold walls that started rising at every family gathering. David's parents, William and Ruth, were as traditional as they come. Midwesterners transplanted to the East Coast, carrying with them an air of old-school propriety and silent judgment. For years, I tried to win their approval, offering up my best versions of home-cooked meals, homemade gifts, and polite laughter at their stories, even when their values clashed with everything I had built for myself in New York. But when the cracks in my marriage became visible, William and Ruth became less like family and more like overseers guarding a fortress I would never truly enter. Instead of sympathy or even uncomfortable silence, I was met with pointed questions and veiled accusations. "Did you put your career before your husband's needs?" Ruth asked during one tense Sunday dinner, her eyes never quite meeting mine. William only shook his head, his disappointment hanging in the air like the untasted wine in his glass. Sometimes, the family's disapproval was more insidious. When my daughter Lily arrived home from a weekend at their place, she clung to me tighter than usual, silently processing the chilly air that now seemed to waft through our homes. They never outright said I was responsible, but the implication lingered in every awkward hug and averted gaze. It wasn't just the in-laws. Even extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, looked at me differently. At every gathering, conversations paused when I entered the room. The weight of their expectations pressed heavy on my shoulders. I was supposed to forgive and forget, to quietly mend what David had broken, to absorb the fallout and keep the family's pristine veneer intact. The worst part? Friends who once stood by me now seemed conflicted, unsure if siding with me threatened their own comfortable connections to David and Stephanie. Isolation spread, subtle and pervasive, fraying my nerves and shaking my confidence in everything I'd ever called my own. I realized then that betrayal wasn't just David's secret texts or stolen glances. It was the way everyone else evaluated me under their frosted lights. Their silence hurt as much as the lies, eroding my sense of belonging. And yet, somewhere in the midst of all their judgment, something hardened in me. Maybe I'd never be their model daughter-in-law or anyone's convenient scapegoat again. I was forging a new self from the ashes of their disloyalty. The silent night and quiet revenge. The chill of October had settled into New York by then, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes the city's heartbeat feel a little bit colder. My apartment had never felt bigger or emptier than on the nights David stayed out late. Nights when I feigned sleep, but actually lay awake staring at the spiderweb of streetlights on my bedroom ceiling. I stopped waiting for his footsteps at the front door. Instead, my mind raced with questions that I was too afraid to ask aloud. I knew from the moment betrayal cut me that anger, raw and untamed, wouldn't serve me. Rage, like any storm, could flatten everything in its path, including myself. So I steeled myself for something harder. Patience. A cold, careful patience that let me gather tidbits, hints, whispers in the dark. A woman rarely plans for vengeance, but when she does, every choice becomes deliberate. You'd be surprised how much can be hidden in plain sight. Unsaved numbers on his phone, vague calendar reminders, even the careless way he'd smile at a message before setting his phone face down. I learned to keep my reactions smooth. If my hands trembled, I hid them under the table. I began quietly collecting old receipts, GPS histories, screenshots stored beneath discreet folder names. Every detail was a puzzle piece. I became obsessive, but never frantic, never the stereotype of the devastated wife. Instead, I turned each clue over like a precious stone, whispering to myself, "Not yet, wait." Meanwhile, I played my part on the surface.
We know you were
On
there.
family group chats, I shared adorable photos of Lily at ballet class. At Sunday dinners, I helped clear the table and laughed at William's tired jokes. I let Ruth correct my cooking and commented on Stephanie's new hairstyle. My voice, perfectly even. All the while, each passing day fueled my quiet resolve. Sometimes the injustice stung so clearly, it felt physical. Like the time Ruth suggested I try harder to keep a man, or when cousins poured David's wine but refused to meet my eyes. There were 100 little ways they insisted I was the problem, and everyone fueled the fire inside me. My revenge didn't look like the movies. There was no dramatic confrontation in a rain-soaked alley, no yelling or plate throwing. This was New York, and I learned that sophistication sometimes came dressed in silence. My plan would unfold at the annual family birthday party for Ruth, an event notorious for its forced cheer, expensive caterers, and uncomfortable mingling. Everyone would be there. The in-laws, both family trees, David, Stephanie with her falsely sweet smile, and all those who'd chosen the convenience of neutrality over righteous discomfort. In the weeks leading up to the party, I finely tuned every detail. I printed emails and hid them in the lining of my purse. I set up a simple slideshow and marked the USB drive with a forgettable label. I practiced looking unbothered in the mirror, rehearsing the words I'd need to say. Short and brutal, no more than necessary. I began living for that night, building myself up with small, necessary lies. You can do this. You are not crazy. This is just the beginning. Some nights, doubt crept in, worming its way into my resolve. Was I about to destroy my family? Would Lily understand someday why I couldn't keep hiding? Those doubts sat with me in the dark, heavy and real. But in the morning, they always faded before the bright certainty of what I knew needed to happen. The people closest to me had refused to hear my pain. If I wanted justice, real, unfiltered truth, then I would have to show them. Not with crying or begging, but with the facts they could no longer deny. So I waited in silence. I let the city's noise fill up the empty corners of my heart. I spent extra hours at work, started running again in the early mornings, and reconnected with old friends who remembered me as I'd been before. Revenge, I whispered to myself, doesn't always have to shout. In that silent autumn, I became my own storm. Quiet, relentless, impossible to ignore. The fateful reunion. Ruth's birthday always arrived with theatrical flair. The Carter family estate in Westchester, pine-lined drive, Tudor-style brick, windows glowing with warm yellow light, was transformed for her annual celebration. This year, the air was thick with the copper scent of fall leaves, blending with the perfume of expensive flower arrangements and the distant, sugary drift of catered desserts. I felt every step of the walk, from the car to the grand front doors. 1,000 miles of memories and expectations swirling around my ankles. I wore my best navy dress, classic pearls, and a mask of serene composure that must have looked impenetrable. Lily's hand, tiny and warm in mine, gave me silent courage. As we entered the foyer, I caught sight of David, already deep in conversation with a cluster of cousins, and Stephanie, even brighter tonight in a crimson skirt, hovering just to his left, laughing a little too loudly at a private joke. Nobody looked up except Ruth, who gave me that brittle half-smile I'd come to know so well. Inside, the house bristled with the energy of anticipation. Relatives from both sides, old friends, business associates, and, of course, the inner circle who never let me forget I was, at heart, an outsider. William made his rounds with a glass of cognac, dispensing stern nods and the odd handshake. The chandelier above the main hall sparkled, highlighting every forced smile and flickering glance. I busied myself helping in the kitchen, arranging canapes and politely making conversation with Lucy, David's cousin, who, despite sharing my first name, seemed determined not to talk about anything but the weather. The kids, including Lily, chased each other down the hallway, giggling and shrieking, as only children insulated from adult drama can. I watched them, wishing for a moment that I could slip into that ignorance, Just a few minutes of peace before what I knew was coming. The party unfurled in softened layers. Ruth's speech about family and tradition, William's quiet pride, David's impeccable toast heavy with sentimental nonsense. I found myself drifting, listening, but also calculating. My purse felt heavier than usual, weighed down by the printed evidence I'd organized with shaking but determined hands. Every time Stephanie's eyes darted toward me, I felt the urge to confront her flare, then fade. Not yet. Hours ticked by. Wine flowed. People eased into their roles, letting the ritual of family togetherness smooth over the jagged undercurrents. Lily tugged at my hand, hungry for dessert. Ruth and the aunts complimented my store-bought apple pie. All the while, I replayed my plan. The files, the USB, the spare memory card, the words I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror, over and over. I have something I need to share with everyone. The fateful moment drew near. I watched David and Stephanie drift to a quiet alcove, close enough for their body language to betray them in front of anyone who bothered to notice. But no one did. Not really. Why would they? That kind of betrayal only happened to other people. As the cake was wheeled out, candles blazing, everyone crowded around Ruth for the traditional off-key happy birthday. I moved close to the main table, heart pounding but face composed. The lights dimmed for just a moment, long enough for secrets to shift, invisible beneath the surface of celebration. This wasn't just a family reunion. For me, it was a reckoning. My memory flickered back to every slight, every moment I'd been dismissed, blamed, silenced. I breathed in, deep and slow, feeling the weight of indignity transform into astonishing clarity. I had the proof. I had the crowd. Now, all I needed was courage. Just as Ruth finished blowing out the candles, between laughter and applause, I stepped forward, excusing myself politely. Heads turned, the room's gentle din fading to an uncertain hush. I could see confusion ripple through David, Stephanie looking down, Ruth frowning, William stiffening. A moment, suspended between tradition and disruption. I took out the USB and handed it to William, asking if he could cue up a short slideshow for the family to see. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. William fumbled with the remote. The screen flickered on, and, for the first time in my life, I felt my true self standing tall, unafraid of anyone's judgment. The fate of this night, my marriage, and the boundaries I would draw for myself would all pivot from this precise and final reveal. Pulling back the curtain of truth, as the final moments of the Carter family slideshow flickered out, a gentle hush fell over the grand living room, one that was equal parts expectation and unconscious dread. Hands holding dessert forks slowed. A few distant relatives eyed their drinks, exchanging polite shrugs. The din of the party faded into something sharper, quieter, as if the very walls of Eleanor's house anticipated the tectonic shift about to unfold. I stood by the screen, nerves laced with icy determination. My voice steady as I announced, "There's one more part to share. Something that matters not just to me, but to anyone who believes truth has value in this family." The words were nothing rehearsed. They rose naturally from everything I'd lived through these ragged months. The slide transitioned, one by one, pieces of evidence materialized on the screen. Time-stamped messages between David and Stephanie, emails with just the right shade of banter that crossed the line into seduction, calendar entries with overlapping locations, each detail cataloged with care. Nothing grotesque, only facts, inescapable and clear. Slow realization swept the room, heads turning to David, who'd frozen in his chair, and then to Stephanie, whose practiced poise evaporated in a visible exhale. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. First the cousins, then the aunts, and finally the stoic patriarch Charles. Eleanor's always perfect posture crumpled inward, her hand flying to her mouth. Friends, once quick to play peacekeeper or gossipmonger, stared down at their shoes. For a long, thick moment, nobody said anything at all. It wasn't rage, I felt. It wasn't even vindication. The room's silence rang with something darker, the sound of illusions breaking, like spun glass, across cold marble. I locked eyes with David, pain and betrayal flickering just beneath his forced calm. Stephanie tried to stammer out a denial, but the timeline left no space for lies. Loyalty, judgment, all the masks people had worn for months. Each one fell away under the relentless light of proof. When Eleanor finally composed herself, her eyes met mine, not with anger, but with devastation at a world she could no longer control. Charles managed a shaky voice. "Emily, why here? Why now?" I simply said, "Because I've spent months screaming in silence. Because no one would believe me when I reached out. Because truth matters, especially here." Aunt Linda tried to intervene, but then stopped as she took in the full breadth of betrayal mapped out on the wall. No pretense could save them anymore. Some family left the table, others just wept. Stephanie quietly excused herself and left the room, David unable to move. In the maelstrom of disclosure, I felt something break in the best possible way. The spell that had kept me chained to shame and silence after a lifetime of being dismissed and doubted. I had made myself undeniable, not through rage, but through unblinking evidence, shared with the people who judged without ever hearing my voice. My story was no longer theirs to rewrite. It was my own. The room would recover with time, or not. I could already feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, the beginnings of my new life taking form in the echoing aftermath. Pulling back, the curtain on their lies had set me free. The wheel of consequences begins to turn. If you've ever watched a stone skim across a lake, you know how a single act can send ripples far and wide, unexpected, relentless, impossible to control. That's what the day after the revelation felt like, for me, Emily. The silence that had followed my unmasking of David and Stephanie, the enormous hush that settled over Ruth's estate, was only the pause before the storm truly began. Now, the wheel of consequences began its inexorable turn, and no one in our constellation could escape its pull. The morning sun came in sharp and uninvited, painting my bedroom in slices of white light. I had barely slept, and when I did, it was only to wake gasping and tense, replaying the faces from last night. David, ashen. Stephanie, trembling and evasive. Ruth, her composure shattered. William, lost. Lily had slept beside me in a fortress of pillows, her thumb tucked in her mouth, breathing steadily, a small, unbroken reminder that innocence still existed in the world, even if only for a short while. When I ventured into the kitchen, the house was already in motion. Ruth was on the phone, her voice clipped and bureaucratic, a woman desperately trying to piece together a narrative in which she had control. William sipped coffee in the living room, gazing at nothing, his shoulders slumped forward uncharacteristically. The air was electric, charged with words unsaid and repercussions yet to come. Not a single Carter looked me in the eyes. David didn't sleep here. I'd heard him stumble out sometime after midnight. Part of me imagined him on Stephanie's couch, both of them staring at opposite walls, silence stretching between them like another betrayal. My anger had long since turned into something harder, a cool, diamond-like clarity. The night before had changed everything, but not in the melodramatic way people might expect. Instead, there was this strange freedom, something I'd never truly expected to feel after so much heartache. Before breakfast was even cleared, the calls started. Cousins, aunts, neighbors, even friends I hadn't seen in years. Some voiced their shock in trembling whispers. More than a few apologized for not believing me sooner. But others, oh, the others, sounded more like spectators at a car crash, eager for details, but uncomfortable with the reality of what they were seeing. Every relationship, it seemed, rearranged itself in this new light. Those who had judged me behind closed doors now scrambled to distance themselves from David and Stephanie, eager to rewrite history, as if their neutrality was proof of wisdom rather than cowardice. My own parents, calling from halfway across the country, surprised me most. My mother, ever the practical one, simply asked, "What will you do now?" as if I might pivot and begin a cooking blog or start a marathon training regime. My father, quieter, just said, "We're proud of you. Whatever comes next, you'll land on your feet." I blinked away tears and understood, for the first time, how much weight a few honest words could carry. Throughout the day, the Carter household transformed into a strange theater of consequence. Ruth directed frantic, hushed conversations, eager to keep the family's social standing intact. I overheard her say, "This can't get out. We need to handle this internally. No public scenes, Emily." I stifled a laugh. The truth, once unleashed, had a restless energy. It couldn't simply be stuffed back into a box or glossed over with a family dinner. David returned that afternoon, more a ghost than a man. Shirt wrinkled, tie askew, eyes rimmed red. He tried to approach Lily, whose greeting was quiet and searching. I watched them together, feeling sorrow, but not regret. When he faced me, he seemed to expect anger or tears. Instead, I stood straighter, voice calm and measured. "There's no fixing this, David. I won't stay somewhere I'm unseen. I won't raise our daughter in a house where the truth is forbidden." There was nothing left to explain. Stephanie never came back to the house, and by sundown, I heard she'd turned in her office badge and packed up her apartment. Friends sent terse texts, some blaming her, others offering more sympathy to David, as if I had, by telling the truth, created the disaster instead of uncovering it. I expected as much. You realize, at the lowest moments, how often people blame a mirror for what it shows. The days that followed were a carousel of repercussions. The Carter family distanced themselves, some out of shame, others perhaps out of loyalty to an old version of their son or self. The neighbors met my gaze now, some with pity, a few with newfound respect. Even the barista at my regular cafe offered me a free muffin and a whispered, "You hang in there." The story seeped out, as stories always do, and in its wake, the judgment that once suffocated me lost its power. I was no longer the villain in their quiet scandals. Lily took it hardest, of course. I tried to shelter her, to explain as gently as I could. But children have radar for pain. There were nights when she'd cry herself to sleep, asking if Daddy would ever come home. And all I could do was hold her and promise that no matter what, she would never be lied to by me. That became the heartbeat of my new existence.
Right there, see it?
No more lies,
That confirms the
no more
timeline.
shadows. Lawyers entered the picture, as they always do.
Changes everything.
Custody, assets, arrangements. I hired a woman recommended by a colleague, sharp, empathetic, and patient, with my need to control details. The Carters, after one disastrous meeting, retreated entirely, relinquishing the kind of authority they once wielded so freely. It was lonely, but it was real. I could finally see a path, however uncertain, that belonged just to me and Lily. As autumn deepened in New York, my life fell into new rhythms. Morning runs, faster and more intentional. Nights with Lily tucked into my side. Reading stories full of heroines who built their own endings. My job became an anchor, not a burden. I let old friends back in, surprising myself with laughter. Each day was a small revolution against who they tried to make me. Nervous, quiet, apologetic. The wheel of consequence spun on for everyone. Rumors followed David and Stephanie through their respective circles. There was no rescue from reputational gravity, no deniability. Some relationships in the family dissolved entirely. A few repaired themselves, scarred but honest at last. And me, I outgrew their approval for good. There wasn't one cathartic moment where I felt the return of justice. Instead, it was a series of small, quiet victories. The first night, I didn't flinch at the silence. The morning Lily laughed until she hiccuped. The ease of walking into my own home without feeling like an imposter. The grand gestures were their undoing. Mine was survival, renewal, and, above everything, a stubborn insistence on dignity. Life, in all its messy glory, kept going, and the wheel kept turning, offering everyone exactly the reckoning they had earned, stepping forward with steadfast resolve. The morning after I moved out of the Carter house, a strange quiet wrapped itself around me, a hush heavy with finality, but also a hint of freedom I hadn't felt in years. Boxes lined the modest hallway of my new apartment, hastily labeled in apologetic black marker. The kitchen window let in a crisp shaft of October light, its touch both unfamiliar and full of promise. For the first time since the storm began, I was truly alone, with Lily, my daughter, sleeping peacefully in the next room, in the city's quiet hum, breathing new life into my tired bones. I took my first cup of coffee in solitude, cupping the mug with hands still trembling. Not from fear or grief, but adrenaline and a stinging sense of disbelief that I'd finally crossed the threshold into my own life. I kept expecting regret to creep in, or maybe guilt over severing ties that, for so long, defined my existence. Instead, what I felt most was relief. The relief of escaping expectation, of letting go of the relentless pressure to mend a family that didn't want to be whole. My thoughts flitted from the chaos I'd left behind. Coldly polite texts from the Carters, a half-hearted apologia from David, a single curt email from Stephanie, but they no longer dictated the rhythm of my day. I spent those first days establishing new rituals, building small scaffolds to steady myself and my daughter as we adjusted to the unfamiliar. Each morning, I laced up my sneakers for a run through the city streets, my breaths even, my heart pounding, not with dread, but with hope. I discovered tiny pleasures in choosing our own groceries, in letting Lily decorate her room with stickers and fairy lights, in filling our apartment with laughter and music nobody but us had chosen. Of course, it wasn't all uncomplicated joy. There were nights when Lily, sensing the shift, would crawl into my bed, clutching her stuffed bunny and whispering questions I wasn't always ready to answer. "Will Daddy come here?" she'd ask, her voice trembling. I stroked her hair and told her the truth. "Daddy loves you, and you'll still see him, but this is our special home now." The pain in her eyes lingered, but with each day, her trust in our new chapter grew, and so did mine. The world, it seemed, kept spinning around our private transformation. Some friends reached out, voices I hadn't heard in years, drawn by the gravitational pull of scandal or genuine concern. I approached these encounters cautiously, wary of becoming mere gossip or someone's heroic anecdote for dinner parties. Still, a few friendships flourished in the new honesty that defined my days. Work took on a new significance. I threw myself into projects with fresh determination, surprising my boss and colleagues with insights I hadn't dared to share when I was mired in exhaustion and secrecy. For the first time, my ambitions felt clean, earned, unshadowed by anxiety about whether I was betraying someone's expectations by wanting more. My supervisor complimented me on my focus, and I finally allowed myself to enjoy the praise. From the outside, I'm sure it looked like I picked up the pieces swiftly, maybe too swiftly for people accustomed to women unraveling in public. But healing, as I discovered, is less about performative resilience and more about tiny, private revolutions. The real work was in those quiet moments. Watching cartoons with Lily on Sunday mornings, hanging new curtains, cooking meals just the way we liked them. I stopped needing to justify our choices to anyone besides myself and my daughter. Occasionally, the shadows of what happened would sneak up on me. A headline about divorce, a sideways look in the grocery store, Lily's drawing of our family, now consisting of just the two of us. Those were bittersweet reminders that some wounds take more than time to heal. But I stopped flinching. I faced each pang with the assurance that while the past shapes us, it doesn't own us. There were practical challenges too, sorting out daycare schedules, legal paperwork, and the 1,000 logistical puzzles of single motherhood. I learned to lean on others in small ways, trading humility for the gift of support. The process was messy and unglamorous, but every week we grew sturdier, more attuned to the rhythms of our own household. David began to visit Lily on alternate weekends. The first few times, she clung to me at drop-off, but quickly adapted, her resilience a testament to the possibility of happiness, even in broken places. I watched David try to piece together a new relationship with his daughter, a quieter, more awkward version than before. Part of me pitied him. Another part felt a kind of gratitude that he'd finally shown his true self, freeing us both from pretending. I watched the Carter family's influence fade gently into the background. Their invitations trickled off, replaced by stilted messages and the occasional gift for Lily. I understood now that my worth had never depended on their validation or tradition, and that the freedom to decide my own values was a gift more valuable than any inheritance. Season after season, our lives filled in with new memories. Lily learned to ride her bike in the shadows of downtown skyscrapers. I signed up for a pottery class just because I'd always wanted to, and we picnicked in Central Park on Saturday afternoons, basking in simplicity, even in the heart of the city's noise. I realized I was no longer just surviving. I was living, actively rebuilding, choosing my own narrative instead of clinging to someone else's blueprint. People sometimes ask if I would do it all again. The confrontation, the public unmasking, the tumble into uncertainty. I think about how hard it was to give up the security of a lie, the daily ache of choosing disruption over silence. But in the bright light of where we stand now, the answer is always yes.
That's him.
I needed to carve out this space,
That's the guy I saw.
not just for myself, but for Lily, to show her that dignity and self-trust matter more than acceptance or appeasement. Looking ahead, my goals are simpler but richer. To nurture Lily's curiosity and joy, to build a home rooted in honesty, and to let myself want more without apology. I've traded illusions of control for the real power of daily self-respect. This is not the life I planned. It's something wilder, braver, shaped by choices I once thought would break me. Now, on the cusp of our new season, I catch myself smiling for no one at all, alive to the endless potential of beginnings. I still make mistakes. The ache of old betrayals still lingers. Yet every day, I choose us, the small, resilient family we've become, over the ghosts of the past. I am no longer waiting for someone else to write my ending. Step by careful step, I am crafting something real, where courage and love, even in their messiest, most human forms, are enough.